screen. I hope you can see now my screen at least, and I will with that open up my slides and give a first brief introduction into what has been happening there. So the question was, as I said, as times were changing rapidly during the development of the tool, that of course, why should we worry about actually over tourism? As also Maria told, tourism is at a pathway, at a crossroads right now in terms of, okay, how should we kind of pick up an activity which has been prospering before, and as Maria said quite correctly, has been contributing to quite a lot of national and regional GDPs, and therefore also a lot of employment and wealth generation in all over Europe. So how could we, in a way, pick up this path without actually falling the same traps of facing over tourism and other inconveniences or externalities which are connected to tourism and to mass tourism in particular. So it was our intention to actually create something which will be a decision support, as I said, in terms of the interactions between tourism and the regional setting, region and society in the same way, and how to then make decisions on the basis of a well-informed, so to say, basis to carry on. So the main intention was actually not only to create a process which helps along destinations, but was more actually to create the underpinning evidence which helps to base then solid decisions upon. And the main, let's say, hypothesis would be that you would need to identify, so to say, sensitive points in the systems between tourism and society environment in order to find where to change then things. And that's exactly what the method is supposed to do. And I will give you actually a very brief run through the method on an Irish case, which I really was very grateful that I got the opportunity to talk with Carol Gleason last week only, actually, when we set up now this case, this Irish case, so to say, in the sense of what you will hear anyway later on, of the Barren Cliffs of Moher UNESCO Global Geopark as the example of a destination in Ireland. So what is the context and what is actually the theoretical background of the whole methodology? It's very straightforward and easily explained. We would assume that actually we treat again a region or regional setting, and we'll come to that. Okay, where do we demarcate then a region or a destination? That's a very first difficult thing to do, because normally they are not oriented upon any statistical demarcations we usually use, like NUTS 3 or a LAO level. However, of course, we will see that if we create evidence, territorial evidence, we are very often bound to such borders. And that makes life, of course, not particularly easy in this context. But in principle, we think that a regional context is a systemic setting in a way. And it's described by a context. It's described by traits, by qualities of this territory with respect to certain environmental traits, with societal traits, with economic ones, and so on and so forth. And then we have then to bring into this context, we have to bring in, so to say, tourism as an external, if we like, to this systemic thinking, external element, which we would then treat as the so-called exposure of this system, where we say, okay, there is a tourist inflow, there is a certain intensity of this inflow, and that's kind of what the systemic context is confronted with. And if we pair these two elements, then we hopefully create then impact information of tourism, and we depict all that, of course, these kind of various interlinkages and interrelationships, we depict that by indicators. And by matching the two, so the context and the inflow or the intensity and exposure, we then create hopefully something like borderlines, or we create something like target corridors for the so-called carrying capacity. But in our case, it would be also creating something like corridors towards a more sustainable tourism. That's the idea. And in principle, the whole methodology is wrapped up in a step-wise methodology, which is in working with a very close interrelation with the destinations or the regions themselves. So you need to enter into the whole setting with a first destination overview, and you do your homework in terms of first finding out what are the overall context, what is the needs of the regions and the specificities of the settings. This is then in a way corroborated and enlarged by matching, as I said before, these two systems. So the regional setting as a system itself and the inflow, or so to say, the exposure of tourism in this territorial context. For that, you have a first direct interaction in the regions by creating a rather large workshop setting, where the main aim is to identify, so to say, causal loops, and come up with first ideas how tourism is interacting with the rest of the regional setting. That will be, of course, then identified and tried to already figure out by indicator, underpinned by indicators, which describe then these causal loops. You then, so to say, go back to your desks and you work on these flow estimations. You work on the information collection, which can then provide this evidence which is needed. So you go either towards predictions, but also estimations and information collection, and then you return to the regional and territorial setting with a second with a second interaction in the large workshop, again with the whole set of stakeholders participating, where you then play back this information, and then most important step would be is this identification. We call it here the carrying capacity at the starting point, but in principle we could replace that by saying, okay, you are identifying in the end a sustainable pathway towards the future, or immediate actions you can do. The most important element in there is that you always stay on the territorial context, so you stay in the region, in the destination, and you only try to find out solutions and immediate steps which can be done on this level. We are well aware of the fact that, of course, one of the major problems tourism is facing in these cases is the different, so to say, governance levels and responsibilities in terms of decision making. Also, for some of the elements, you think about transport, think about other elements which will not be decided on the regional and local level. However, our tool is rather concentrating or trying to kind of activate all the activities which can be done on this regional or local level. So what I tried now, thanks to Carol, last week was really a quick and dirty way, so to say, of creating this or simulating this first workshop setting. I mean, the two of us, we were sitting together in a Skype call and trying to identify some crucial elements for the Barn Cliffs of Moher destination, so to say. So please excuse me, this is really a very rough sketch without any claiming of completeness, and of course we just did it and kind of shook it out of our sleeves spontaneously, so to say. But what you can identify, for instance, was we have in peak time, so when you have high season, so to say, you have then of course the problem with acceptance of the local population versus tourists because of an overload of, for instance, public transportation or ferry boats. You have, on the other hand, of course, the problem in a nature protecting zone like a UNESCO global geopark, that you cannot, or to only to limited way, steer tourist flows, which means, of course, that you have the impression in the region and local setting that there is hardly a way out, because I cannot move in a way. We will come to that. You have furthermore, of course, externalities produced by tourists, which is, for instance, waste production, with a negative repercussion on the environment. You have then, of course, also we have identified these problems of the competences which are scattered between the different regimes, and that, of course, leaves you yet again with the feeling that you have hardly any way out, or you can hardly move in a way, so to say. So this is a little bit, and the last one was then, of course, which is also quite frequent in the case of nature destinations, is this what is always claimed, these weak interlinkages of the tourism with other economic sectors in the regions, so that there is hardly any benefit to be seen on the regional level. So what we do now, or what we try now, is then, and this is what has been also developed within the tool, is a rather powerful evidence-based dashboard, which presents this information in a hopefully easily digestible way. I briefly show you what can be shown there. That's on the one hand, you have the indicators in terms of the data flows, or the data for tourism intensity itself. You can then also depict, of course, the context separately, and you can also use, and that was something rather innovative, you can use the big data in the dashboard, for instance, OpenStreetMap data and Instagram, for instance, or social media data, which helps to depict you. And with that, I show you, and I go quickly out of my presentation and show you some of these pictures. So the first one is what I want to show you is the situation you will see in Ireland. But I have to apologize. Of course, we didn't have that much of a database in this short time. I told you we started last week, so it was just a little bit of thing. So we would assume that, first of all, the problem we had in Ireland was, of course, that the granulation in terms of what the regions are just not 3 regions in Ireland, because the local data is, especially the one which is publicly available, is rather limited. So what we do have then, and I will start with the data on the OpenStreetMap data. So what you have here, for instance, you can create heat maps with the so-called POI hotspots. That's the points of interest, which is deducted from OpenStreetMap. That's practically every tourism infrastructure you would find. So from sites to see over to bars, restaurants, hotels, everything which is there. And by the density, of course, you can create something like a heat map. That's the only way we could depict region or local data. And what is very interesting to see, I mean, we have our destination, so to say, we have around here, so the islands and this area, so to say, where is the park. And what could be seen is, of course, first of all, quite correctly, is that you have a kind of concentration, of course, in certain hotspots within this region. I mean, I can even zoom in so that you can have a better look. But what my point is of course, one of the lessons you can learn and deduct here is, of course, that by enlarging, as a matter of fact, the perspective of the destination to a larger area, so giving it a more regional context, like, for instance, including also Galway with also quite a large variety of options here, it would mean that you also have then a better way of kind of steering your tourist flows, in a way. So this means it opens up opportunities, maybe, if you when you kind of leave your narrow perspective of a destination and open it up more regionally. And by this tool, of course, you could then see and look into possible ways of doing that. Sure enough, if I then switch to the original The original, so to say, cases we created that for, which was really on a local level, and that was in Slovenia. And I just show you here one example of Bled, where I can mirror, so to say, my hotspots like I've showed you before. So I go in there and see the same map, same heat map I've shown you for Ireland. Now this is really low, very local. And I take, for instance, Bled, which probably everybody of you knows because of the lake. And then what I can do is, of course, I can, because this is just showing a potential, right? It's a POI hotspot, which is something which is there. But I can mirror that, for instance, with actual, for instance, social media posts from the region, and then I see immediately that the hotspots are becoming smaller and the real concentration of where people actually go can be shown. So that's a very interesting feature where you can then see, for instance, where things are happening and what has been happening on the ground in a way. What we also then do, and with that I switch again back to the presentation, is of course we can predict somehow of course trends. We can do that as well in the case of your Ireland cases. So I can show tourist flows, and I have that, for instance, for the bad places, and I can do that again for Midwest, for our region in question. And what I can see here, for instance, if I compare the bad place development with the overnights, it's clear that, for instance, the overnight stays were actually increasing quite nicely in the region, whereas actually the bad places were actually going down, or only then in the late phases were kind of climbing up again. And this is also, of course, something which helps along with looking into the tourist development itself. And finally, what you do then is, of course, you can match something like the tourism intensity, like I said before, like in our case with bad places, or let's say overnight stays. And you can match that with context indicators, in our case, for instance, with income, household income in our cases, and see how this is developing. For that, we can also create heat maps where you see the region in the black fat dot, so to say, is in comparison with all other NUTS3 regions in Ireland and its development over time. So you can see, okay, for instance, that here actually income was staying pretty stable in a way throughout the years.
Sorry, Bernd,
yeah.
Sorry, I have to interrupt you, sorry, really, but your presentation is not totally visible for all the guests.
Oops.
And they are asked if it's possible to have this presentation to see again, and I answer yes by the ESPON website.
Of course, the presentation is there.
Our time is running, and so
no, I'm almost done. I'm almost done. Sorry, Maria, and I will switch back to the presentation. I hope you can see that at least. Now, so what you do with the whole information, so to say, is then you can then, like say, also have territorial comparisons in terms of the time the tourism flows. So what you do then is, like I said in the beginning, you go then and look from these let's say bulk and richness of information. You go and discuss with the destination then the so to say the sustainable way forward on the basis of that, including already all the stakeholders, which is actually a very nice benefit for that. And that might help you actually to identify any, let's say, sustainable ways out of this, let's say, trap you are right now within this low or this feeling of helplessness, which you often have on this regional and local scale for the destinations. So that was already from my side. Sorry if I took too long, and I will with that stop sharing my screen. And yeah, thank you already for your patience, and sorry if it took me too long.